Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We want to go deep on topics that maybe don't get enough attention, and today we're talking about something that you specifically requested,
Oh, cool.
structures. But we're focusing on how it's taught in the International Middle Years curriculum, specifically for Year 7.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at the IMYC curriculum guidelines themselves
Excellent.
to see how they approach this idea of structures and help those Year 7 students grasp a concept that really is kind of woven into every part of life.
It really is everywhere you look.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, we tend to think of structures as buildings or bridges, but it's so much more than that.
Right.
And that's something that the IMYC really gets.
So how do they actually define structures in this curriculum? It feels like such a broad term, Where do you even begin?
Well, they actually do a nice job of breaking it down.
Okay.
They talk about those physical structures, the things that we can see and touch.
Of course.
But then they go deeper and they talk about organizational structures.
Oh, interesting.
So things like how a government is structured
Right.
or how a business is organized.
Okay.
And then they even go a step further and they talk about conceptual structures.
Okay.
Things like the framework of a story
Oh, interesting.
or a scientific theory.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's almost like recognizing those hidden frameworks that give shape and order to things we might not even realize have a structure.
Absolutely. And I think what's key here is that regardless of what form a structure takes,
Yeah.
it provides support, stability, and organization.
Okay.
It's like the blueprint for complex systems to actually work.
It's true. You think about like a building without a solid structure, it's going to crumble.
Exactly.
Government, what a good structure,
Right.
descends into chaos.
Right.
Even a story kind of loses its impact if it doesn't have a good underlying structure.
It's true. It falls apart.
It just falls apart, yeah.
Yeah.
So then how do the IMYC actually guide students through this? How do they take them on this journey of exploring structures? I'm especially interested in how they build up to that exit point project, which we know is a big part of the IMYC.
Yes. And they follow a really interesting learning cycle that starts with an entry point
I see.
to kind of spurk that initial curiosity. And then they go through different stages like knowledge harvest, where they're gathering information,
Gathering all the information.
deepening understanding, where they start to analyze and connect ideas.
Okay,
And then it all culminates in the exit point, which is not just like a simple presentation.
right.
It's more like a chance for them to really demonstrate what they've learned.
I like that. It seems very active and engaging.
Yeah, it's very hands-on.
It's not just passively absorbing information.
No, and they're really encouraged to make it their own.
That's cool.
Be creative and showcase their understanding.
So what's interesting to me is it seems like the exit point isn't just about showcasing what they've learned, but it's almost about applying that knowledge.
Absolutely.
It's like solving problems, thinking critically,
communicating ideas.
communicating. Yeah,
Effective.
it's going beyond memorization and going more into like the why behind these structures.
Exactly. Like you said, it's not just knowing the parts of a cell.
Right.
It's how do they work together.
Yeah, or like what happens when that structure breaks down.
Right. How does that affect things? And the guidelines actually suggest a variety of different formats for the exit point.
Oh, cool.
So it could be something like model building,
Okay.
leadership challenges, documentaries, debates.
Wow.
They even mention digital portfolios,
Oh, wow.
which I think is really cool.
That's really neat. It gives them a lot of freedom
A
to
lot of choice, a lot of flexibility.
express themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of room for creativity and individual expression within this framework, which I really appreciate.
They really emphasize that
So what kind of examples do they give?
of potential exit point projects.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see, like, what does this look like in practice?
Yeah, and one of the examples that I thought was really interesting was the idea of designing a sustainable city.
Oh, wow.
So students would have to think about not just the physical structures of buildings and infrastructure,
Right.
but also the organizational structures of things like resource management
Okay.
and urban planning.
Wow. So it's not just about making it, look cool. It's about making it actually functional and sustainable.
Right, thinking about those long-term implications.
It's a really relevant challenge for them to be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. And another example that they suggest is creating a presentation that kind of digs into the structure of a complex industry,
Ooh, okay.
the water bottling industry.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And I think that's a really great example because there's so much to unpack there.
There's like the different levels of the supply chain.
Right.
There's the environmental impact,
Yeah.
the marketing strategies. It's like peeling back all these layers of something that seems simple.
To see that intricate web underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by doing that, they're really demonstrating they understand how both those physical and organizational structures impact our lives and the world.
Right. They all connect in a way.
It's true.
Yeah.
It seems like the IMYC is encouraging students to think critically and make those connections
Yes, absolutely.
between abstract ideas and real-world applications.
That's a big part of it.
But we've talked a lot about the exit point as a product.
The final product.
Yeah, the final product.
Uh-huh.
How do they emphasize the learning process that leads up to that?
Well, throughout the learning cycle, they really emphasize reflection.
Oh, okay.
And they actually provide guiding questions for students to consider.
Like what kind of questions?
Things like, how do structures impact my life?
Hmm.
Or how can understanding structures help solve problems in the world?
Oh, I like that.
And I think those questions are really helpful because they encourage students to connect what they're learning to their own experiences and to
Yes.
think about the bigger picture.
So it's not just about ticking the boxes and getting the project done.
Right.
It's about developing this deeper understanding
Exactly.
of how structures influence our lives
And our world.
in these really profound ways.
Yeah,
It's pretty incredible.
it is.
It's amazing how they take a concept like structures, which could very easily feel dry and theoretical,
Yeah, it could.
and they make it relevant
And engaging.
and engaging for these young learners.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm still curious, though, about how they actually delve into the science aspect of it.
Of structures.
Yeah, especially with the Year 7 students.
Right, right.
Like, how do they approach that?
That's where it gets really interesting, and I think we should dive into that
Let's do it.
after a quick break.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, so we were talking about how the IMYC brings structures to life for these Year 7 students, and I'm really curious to hear more about how they tackle the science part of it.
Well, they use the natural world, specifically living organisms, as a really powerful way to illustrate the concept of structures, and they introduce this idea of a hierarchy of organization,
Okay?
starting with the most basic building block, the cell.
Oh, yes, the cell, those tiny units of life that we all learned about way back when.
Exactly.
But it's been a while, so remind me,
Yeah.
how do they fit into this bigger picture of structures?
Think of it like this. Cells are like the bricks of a building.
Okay?
They each have their own specific structures and functions.
Right.
But when you put them together, they form tissues, which are kind of like the walls of the building.
I see.
And then those tissues combine to create organs, which are like the rooms in the building, each with its own purpose.
Okay.
And then all those organs working together form organ systems, which are basically the different functional units of a building.
Like the plumbing or the electrical system.
Exactly. And finally, all the organ systems come together to form a complete organism, which is the whole building.
So it's like this Russian nesting doll
Yes.
of structures within structures,
That's a great way to put it.
with each level building on the one before it.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is that this hierarchical structure is present in all living organisms, from the tiniest bacteria to the largest animals and plants.
I remember back in school looking at onion skin cells under a microscope,
Oh, yeah?
and it was just incredible to see all those tiny compartments, each with their own like cell wall and nucleus and
Oh,
cytoplasm,
fascinating.
all working together.
Yeah, and the IMYC doesn't just stop at describing these structures.
Okay.
They actually touch upon the process of cell division, or mitosis,
Right.
which is essential for growth and repair.
So it's not just static structures, it's about how those structures change and adapt.
Exactly. It's this dynamic process where a single cell divides into two identical daughter cells,
Wow.
each with its own complete set of structures.
It's almost like that saying, the only constant is change.
Right.
Even at this microscopic level, everything is in flux.
Always adapting, responding to new challenges.
So fascinating.
It is.
And this brings us back to the IMYC's emphasis on the exit point,
Right.
because by having students create projects that demonstrate their understanding of structures, they're not just memorizing facts.
Right.
They're grappling with these complex concepts and applying them in creative and meaningful ways.
Exactly. Like you said earlier.
So instead of just drawing a diagram of a plant cell,
Right.
they might design an experiment
Yes.
to test how different environmental factors affect cell growth.
Exactly.
Or maybe create a 3D model that demonstrates the process of mitosis.
It's about going beyond that rote learning and really engaging with the material.
Yeah, making it come alive.
Exactly.
And, this is making me think about how understanding structures isn't just about science or biology.
Right.
It's like a fundamental skill for understanding the world around us,
It really is.
whether we're talking about natural systems or human societies.
Or even the way we organize information in our own minds.
It's true. It's like a mental toolkit for decoding these complex systems and patterns
Absolutely.
that shape our lives.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the next part of our conversation, where we'll actually delve into some specific examples from the IMYC guidelines.
Yes, I'm excited to see what these projects look like in practice
Me too.
and what kind of creative solutions students have come up with, because it sounds like the possibilities are really endless. So we've talked a lot about the theory behind structures and how the IMYC approaches it, but I'm ready to see the rubber hit the road.
Right. Let's get to the exit point project.
Yeah. What are some of the examples that really jumped out at you from those guidelines?
Well, one that I thought was really cool was the idea of students creating a presentation about a structure that they find personally fascinating.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it could be anything that sparks their curiosity.
So not necessarily something super academic.
Right. It could be the architecture of a bridge or like the hierarchy of a beehive
Oh, wow.
or even the structure of their favorite video game.
That's neat.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to tap into their individual interests and really personalize the learning experience.
Yeah, it's about making those connections to things that they actually care about.
Exactly, and it encourages them to go beyond just surface level observations.
Okay.
So they have to analyze how the structure works,
Right.
why it's important, what challenges it might face.
So it really gets them thinking critically.
Yeah, and developing those communication skills.
I can imagine that leading to some really interesting presentations.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, like a student who's passionate about music could analyze the structure of a symphony,
Right.
or someone who loves history could dig into the social structures of, like, ancient civilizations.
Yeah, the possibilities are endless.
That's cool. And what about for students who are maybe more visually inclined?
Well, the guidelines also suggest creating an art piece inspired by a structure in their city.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so it could be a sculpture that captures like the lines of a skyscraper,
Right.
or a painting that depicts the energy of a marketplace,
Oh, that's beautiful.
or even a digital collage that represents the interconnectedness of their community.
It's like bridging that gap between these academic concepts
Right,
and creative expression,
absolutely.
which I think is so important.
And of course, no art piece is complete without an artist's statement.
That's true.
So they would also have to explain their creative choices,
Right.
connect their artwork back to the theme of structures, and share their insights.
I like that. It's adding another layer of meaning.
Exactly.
It shows that they're not just creating something beautiful, they're thinking deeply about what's behind it.
They're really engaging with the concept.
And what about for the storytellers out there? What kind of options do they have?
Well, there's a really intriguing challenge for them, writing a fictional piece about what would happen if a crucial structure suddenly disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Like, what if there were no governments,
Okay.
no internet,
That'd be rough.
right?
Or even no families.
What would our world look like?
That's such a cool prompt.
It forces them to think about those structures that we often take for granted
Yeah,
and how their absence would really disrupt our lives.
I like that.
It could be a really thought-provoking exercise.
And they could explore those ideas through storytelling,
Exactly.
which I think is really powerful.
Yeah.
Speaking of real-world connections, I'm also curious about how the IMYC brings in that emphasis on sustainability and global citizenship.
Oh, that's a great point. And they actually have some really impactful project ideas that tie into that.
Okay, like what?
Well, one suggestion is for students to design a solution for a sustainability issue in their school or community.
Oh, cool.
So whether it's reducing waste or conserving energy or creating a more sustainable transportation system.
They're like architects of change,
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
taking their understanding of structures
right?
and using it to make a positive impact.
And I think that's so important. It's empowering them to see themselves as agents of change,
Right.
not just passive observers of global issues.
They're actually shaping the world around them.
I love that.
Yeah, and another example is researching the structure of a complex industry, like the bottled water industry that we talked about earlier,
Okay.
and creating a presentation that raises awareness about its impact.
So they're really digging deep and questioning these systems that shape our world.
Exactly, and maybe even inspiring others to demand more sustainable practices.
It's been such an incredible journey exploring this concept of structures through the lens of the IMYC.
It really has.
It's so clear that they're not just teaching facts, they're cultivating critical thinkers
And problem solvers.
and engaged citizens.
Absolutely.
It's inspiring to see how something as simple as structures can become this springboard for such a rich learning experience.
It's amazing what they've done with it.
So to our listeners out there, we leave you with this final thought. What structure in your own life or community could you reimagine or redesign or maybe even reinvent to create positive change?
We encourage you to let this deep dive be a spark.
To ignite your curiosity
Your creativity.
and your commitment to building a better world.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.